Hi guys, Togo here with a new video, and this video will be the most wanted classes tier list for Classic WoW Fresh, and I'm talking about a PvP server, not like a HC. And for PvE, to be fair, it is probably the same as PvP. This is like the most classes that are most wanted in PvE, but also I'm going to think about PvE as PvP as well. So PvE and PvP as well. Because I do think World of Warcraft Classic is a fantastic game that is really meshing PvE and PvP very well. It's not really only about PvE, it also is not only about PvP. You kind of need both, especially on the PvP server. Again, you can come to me with like, I play PvE server, I don't care about PvP, and that's fine, but that's my POV. Okay, so it might be different from another classic content creator that is more about PvE. I am more about PvP, but I also think PvE is something you need to think at all times whenever you're playing classic. Now let's start right away with how I view this tier list. So we have S tier, which are the most wanted classes in raids, in PvP, in dungeons, in anything you're going to touch. Those are the most wanted classes. A tier means that they are wanted, but it could be that on a certain aspect it's a bit less. In B tier means that it is like kind of hit or miss. It depends on what content you're doing. C tier means that it is most likely not really wanted except for these parts, and then D tier means that they are not wanted at all. I'm going to say, and probably right now there is no D tier. I think all classes have their strengths and weaknesses. I'm not going to give a pure D tier. If I have to put a D tier, it would be like a very meme spec, for example. And even then, I would even say that the meme spec is maybe good in dungeons, but maybe a bit less in raids and PvP. Now we're talking about 9 classes. Yes, we could then talk about red, holy, and prot paladin, but I'm going to mesh everything into like prot paladin. Whenever I'm saying prot paladin, it means that the tanking spec, which is probably like a holy prot build or a prot red build. You could like again do a lot of stuff with paladin. So I'm going to talk about like the class in general with the best in mind, not really like the worst possible outcome for them. So I'm going to start with the easier class to rank, and it would be the warrior class. Now, why is it the most wanted class? Well, World of Warcraft, dungeons and raids, you need tanks, and especially in dungeons, from low level to even a higher level, or like to the end game, like dungeons, even whenever Dire Maul is going to come out, whenever you're doing Strathomes or Skullomans or whatever, and even in raids, you need tanks. And tanks are mostly represented by warriors. Yes, you can have a few feral druid that can tank and they do very well, and you could also see the occasional protection paladin or the AoE tank paladin, which is not that bad, but again, a lot of people need to trust and know how to not pump from the start of a pull, for example. But I would say that warrior, if it's a DPS, it is the most wanted class in raids, the most wanted class in PvP, because it is like a good frontliner that has a MS effect, which is very rare in World of Warcraft Classic. Again, in TBC, it's a bit different. But in Classic, wow, Warrior is the ultimate class. Like, it is the hero class of Classic. If you think about DKs whenever it was coming out in Wrath of the Lich King, Warrior is that class for Classic. It's very good in dungeons. You can run melee cleaves. You can also run classical dungeon compositions where you only have like one tank or like one tank DPS, which is a warrior. You can tank as a DPS spec, you can tank as a fury prot, you can tank as a arms warrior, you can tank with a lot of stuff. As a warrior, don't really need to be tank spec'd to be tanking, and that's a fantastic thing. But also, like DPS wise, it is also always going to be very well, and once the world buffs are in, that is going to also help the warriors considerably with their tasks in dungeons, raids, and PvP. PvP as well, like you at least want one, if not two, in a pre-made, for example. And they are very valuable because they are very good at what they're doing, which is like being a frontliner, being like a very sturdy class, and they're very much doing perfectly in what they do. Yes, in solo PvP or solo PvE, it's not that great, but this is like a most wanted class. So if you're looking about a class and you're looking like about a tank or a DPS, what is coming into mind? It would be a warrior. So it is like a POV of I need to look for the best composition, or I need to look for the best PvP mate. That's how this tier list could be seen. Now, something that is quite difficult to rate is Paladin. In raids, I would say that it is S tier because you want to have salvation, you want to have the auras, you want to be like seeing the healers as well. They're like never really going once they have like their like best possible crit sets. They really like do very well at that, so that's a good thing compared to like for example Druid, where they do get very quickly as the rest of the Druid. They are very valuable. So I would say in raids it would be S tier. In dungeons, I personally really love about Paladin, not red, unfortunately, but like a really good tank is really a beautiful sight to be seen in dungeons. Like they're really holding AoE threat by a lot if you are respecting on the 5 seconds or 4 seconds to go in. Like if you let him like do a consecration and take a few hits and boom, you can then just go in and it will hold threat pretty well. They don't have a taunt, so I would say that it is a bit less valuable than a warrior, but it is quite good. And as a dungeon healer, it is also a very good one, and they can like again dispel magic and diseases, so it's a very welcome thing. But also they can dispel, if I'm not mistaken, poisons. And benediction, like freedom, is also a very good thing to have in specific situations where you have like your warrior being rooted by a net and he has to get threat from a mob that is running towards a mage, for example. So that's also a very good thing. I would say like in PvP, you also want to run at least one Paladin, and it would mostly be a healer. Retribution Paladin is quite niche. Again, in raids the same, it's quite niche to see, like it's really not good. Like again, I'm not gonna lie, Retribution Paladin is not that good in raids. If you run one, it is mostly because you are like doing a social thing, or you appreciate the player, not really the class, and you're there just for the experience, which is good, which is fine. If you have a raid that can like again lose 1 DPS to get like a Retribution Paladin, it is really good. But whenever I'm in a raid, and if I was a Retribution Paladin, I would be feeling guilty whenever I see like a good piece of loot that could go for a warrior, for example, which is again a sentiment that I don't really not like to have. So that's why I'm not really playing Paladin right now, or at least like I'm hesitating to play it. I do believe like it's S tier in demand, but I need to compare it between the other classes. So for now, I'm going to put them S tier because they are quite a good class in general, and Alliance really wants to have Paladins at least 5 at least. So yeah, I do appreciate a Paladin. I'm gonna say again, I think it's no surprise. I do believe that Shaman is a very wanted class. It's very top heavy. This tier list is going to be very top heavy, I'm not gonna lie. Paladin and Shaman are equal in the demand department. I think that if Shamans were also to Alliance and Paladins towards Horde, they would be literally 2 stackable classes in both factions. Shamans has again Wind Fury, which is going to be mandatory in parties with warriors. So if you have like 4 warriors or like 3 warriors, 1 rogue or whatever, you really want to have at least 1 shaman in that party. So it is a very in demand class for dungeons as well, because if you want to do melee cleaves, or if you want to do for example, if you want to do melee cleaves, or if you want to do I say caster cleave a bit less, I guess, but if you want to do melee cleaves or traditional groups with like let's say 1 warrior, it is always going to be very appreciated to have a Wind Fury totem. But also if you are healing, that's great, but you could also go DPS in dungeons, and that is quite good. Like again, I really like elemental shamans. I do believe like it's one of the best classes, especially in the beginning of the game, but also later. Um, and it has a spot. Again, I don't know how much of the appreciation is for elemental shamans and for enhancement shamans, but I do appreciate it a lot, especially the hybrid aspect of it, but also all the buffs that it gives. But and then you are having with raids where you want to run at least, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 8 shamans, a shaman per group, so you could give a lot of those totems towards your parties, so you could do more DPS or do more like better just in general. But as you may know, it is mostly resto shamans or like healer shamans. You could sometimes see an elemental shaman. You could sometimes see an enhancement shaman with like, let's say, nightfall. But it is not that appreciated. But they mostly are there because they are giving totems towards the parties, which is a good thing to have as well. In PvP, I personally think like Elemental Shaman is just like a most wanted class DPS wise because it can just literally blow someone up, and that's essentially winning you team fights. And then the hybrid aspect where you could also heal very well, and you're a very good duelist. You could also 1vx very well. I really enjoy shamans, and whenever I'm playing horde, I think shamans are like very cool, and they are really wanted in my parties and groups, and also pre-mates to PvP. And whenever I'm facing shamans into PvP, I really despise them, especially right now whenever I'm playing priest. I see a shaman, I really just want to turn back and try to find a mate to delete the shaman versus me. So right now, S tier, in my opinion. Now we're coming into the most controversial classes, I would say, where I might make enemies here and there. But I'm gonna start with most likely Druid because I have experience in 2019, and I am very close of alting one in right now 2024. Um, it is not that wanted in dungeons because it is very limited. I think Resto Druid really just misses a res. So there are a lot of groups where they don't have res, and you don't want to have like that sensation where you need to really survive, or else you're going to probably have a corpse walk, which is not always going to be cool. You could tank as a druid, which is very appreciated. I personally really love feral tanks, but like DPS, they are not that great because they have or they lack a lot of the AoE capacities that other classes have. Dungeons has always been like more about an AoE thing, and then in like versus boss fights, you could then go a lot like very much single target damage, and that's why they do well in single target, but in the AoE it kind of slows down. And then Balance Druid, for example, is a bit less good because it just doesn't have the mana for it. If it had mana, maybe it would be a bit more competitive, but right now it is just not the case. And like I said, Whistle Druid is just not that great. And then you have raids where basically it is mostly the raid that can actually give a chance to Druid. For example, a Feral Druid is not that bad, but obviously you need to see if you want to have a warrior or a feral druid. Like if you have like two mates, you don't know any of them, and you know they're like equally skilled. Do you take a warrior or do you take a feral druid? And normally people will take the warrior because they know they just like the gear. While feral druids they like have a skill thing, like for example power shifting, which is not that hard, but still it's a thing that you need to do compared to a warrior. You have the MCP farms. It's very specific as well. And then again, if you want to tank, the best spot is probably for the warrior. So you are like a second choice pretty much. And if you are first choice, it means that the raid really knows you well as a player. For example, I do believe garden druids like feral druids tanks are very good and they are very proficient. I really love them because they take little damage. But in general, in the eye of the public, I do feel like it's less interesting. Now, one thing to note, in PvP you at least want one druid for flag carrying, so it is highly regarded. If you think about PvP pre-mades, you really want to have a druid and it's S tier. If you're thinking about the raids, it is really between C and B. Like, you need, it's not really you need, you actually just want one druid per raid for Mark of the Wild. That's the only reason. And battle res, which is always going to be nice in fights. But the idea of a raid is to keep your world buffs, which is not dying. So obviously, if you are dying, you're losing your world buffs, which is a bit sad, and it would be better if you didn't. So battle res is good, but it's like no real safety net. It just is like a anti-annoyance thing, but you still lose your world buff, so it's really just reactive and not proactive. And then dungeons, like I said, it only is one very wanted role, which is tank, which is, again, we're not running out of warriors right now, so it's really easy to find a tank if they are like known that they can tank. DPS committed players are not really welcome right now, and that's just a joke, but it is just true. Like, if you're a warrior, you can just pretty much tank any dungeons, and it doesn't matter, like DPS wise, you're still going to be on the top. So with that in mind, I do believe, like, since you need one druid in the raids, since you need at least, minimum, really need one druid in PvP, and in dungeons, if you're a tank, you're very like highly sought off. I do believe it's a B tier. Again, it could go lower to C tier, but like, it's me talking with a bias. I played Druid in 2019. I found always a group in dungeons because I was a tank. In raids, I could like literally play Feral, I could play Balanced Druid, I could play Resto Druid. I was wanted, I was satisfied with my playtime in the main raid, and I did well because, again, they suggested to go Balanced Druid just to test how it was for the casters. They made me test also Feral Druid DPS with power shifting. It was fun, although very exhausting to MCP farm every single time. But truly, I do believe like it's not like highly sought of, and I could even put it in C tier. But I think about PvP a bit more, and that's why I'm putting in B tier. Now, rogues, they are very, very, very much a um, egoistical class in the sense of they don't bring too much in dungeons. They don't bring too much in raids either. In PvP, it is a good flag defender or flag retaker. It's not a bad class, but it's not something you really want to stack either. It's not like you need one, but you would want one in PvP settings, for example. And um, if I may be honest, like in dungeons, if you take a rogue, it's mostly for its DPS, and if it's not top DPS, it kind of sucks. Now, the one thing I really prefer in dungeons that you don't have in raids is that stunts are very effective. I love seeing kidney shots, sheep shots, even a blind on an off target, even a sap on a target to make the group way easier. I really love that, and I really appreciate that as well. I, for example, played Lib as a priest, so Scarlet Monastery Lib, and I played without a tank. I just played with 3 rogues, 1 mage, and it actually works out way better than with a warrior because they took so little damage because they always had kidney shots on 3 targets differently. So one target was kidney shot, then the other target was kidney shot, and the other target was also kidney shot. It made the group healing a lot less stressful than sometimes a melee cleave like with 4 ravagers would do. So I really love rogues in dungeons. I really think it has a place in the dungeon meta. But it is really egoistical. If the group goes wrong, what do? They just vanish. That's just how rogues work. They don't have any buffs towards the group. They don't really bring any utility in the group. But if you think about it, stunts are utility. And in raids, it is purely damage. You don't really stack rogues as much as warriors. You pretty much take rogues to like get, again, gearing a bit easier for the warriors, but also easier for the rogues itself because you could go dagger or swords. In my opinion, just with that fact, I do believe it is B tier. Some people may say it's A tier, but again, I'm thinking about like it ahead of time. We still have 4 classes, but I do believe like rogues, they are not as needed as the other classes. Like I think it is hit or miss depending on what situation you're thinking in. Rogues, you have plenty of rogues, so you don't really usually need them. They will just come naturally, while a druid, you will not see a druid every single turn of a street, so obviously you're going to search for them and be happy whenever you're going to get one good druid that can flag carry very effectively. And in raids, again, like I said, if you could replace a rogue into a warrior that is fully bis, for example, you would do that in a heartbeat, while a fully bis rogue, you would take them, but it's again, if you compare full bis rogue, full bis warrior, is there any reason to take a rogue? It's a bit of a no. So that's why I'm going to put them at B tier, because it is like a hit or miss class in that aspect. Now, mage, very sought off. I'm going to start off with a tier. PvP, they're very good at stopping, again, the healers, because polymorph is such a strong ability. You have not really a lot of stuff that can actually stop the polymorph or like make you out of polymorph, except a dispel. And if you can polymorph a healer, it is like one dispel less. So obviously, it is very strong at stopping the enemies. In PvE dungeons, spell cleaves, it's unwanted. In like boosting, wanted. In just normal groups, like just normal warrior, rogue, mage, warlock groups, you want a mage because it actually saves your groups because of roots, slows, but also the damage that it does in AoE is like impressive. If you're thinking about ahead of time, AQ fire mage is blasting. So obviously at that point it becomes the warrior version of casters, I would say. So it's very proficient. And again, like I said, in PvP, you will run maybe 2 mages, 1 mage, depending on the comp that you're going. Might make a video about that. If you're doing pre-mages, which is something if you're thinking about. I do believe like mage is a very wanted class, and if you're making a mage, we pretty much have the popularity of a warrior, but a bit less. So I do believe it's a A tier. Warlocks. Now I'm going to talk with the idea of PvP raids and dungeons in mind. Raids, they are very wanted because you want to put the curses. So we have Curse of Wreck, Curse of Elements, and that itself is very big. We have Healthstones, we have portals. Again, I do believe Warlocks are fantastic and they are underpopulated as well. So, for example, in any guild I see, you will see a lot less warlocks compared to mages, warriors, or whatever class you're going to see. It is on the lowest bottom of played classes with Druid right now. You don't need to look at census for that. You just need to look with your eyes the amount of warlocks you're going to see and the amount of druids compared to rogues, mages, warriors, and even priests. I do believe warlocks are great and it is wanted. Raids, you want warlocks to tank in AQ, by the way, as well, but also the DPS is actually very good. And now we have uncapped debuff, so we'll have to see how it goes. And in general, I do appreciate warlocks pretty much like always. In dungeons, I do believe it's a bit less wanted, but for the wrong reasons. They see them as the wrong stepchild of a mage, which is unlucky because I do believe in a lot of situations warlocks are very cool and very wanted in a lot of those situations. So I'm going to put them at A tier, equally than mage. I know that right now warlocks, it is not something you can replace blindly in your raids. If you have 3 warlocks, those 3 warlocks are going to stay main team probably for the remainder of classic, because you need them to be geared, you need them to be performing, and you need them just in general for logistics, which again with curses, portals, it is very hard to deal with that. While a rogue is purely just DPS, a warlock is DPS, but also the utility that is attached to warlock, which is fantastic. Priest, I would say priest are wanted, but they are they are wanted, but it's like warriors you can stack as much as you want, while priests are not really that stackable. Like in general, buffs wise, you only need one priest. You have spirit and you have the stam buff. That's it. So for example, as horde, priest is pretty much B tier, maybe C tier on the wanted list. Because you'll have a lot of shamans, so you only need one priest to really buff, and that's it. But you take more because you don't want to like crowd the shamans too much with the amount of loot. So obviously you're not going to run 16 shamans. You're going to try to run a bit more priests to, again, try to balance the gearing aspect. But in alliance, you actually want to run 4 or 5 priests because they're actually very good at healing, and you could also run a few shadow weavers, or like make them play shadow priest, and they could also dual spec now. So that's interesting, where they could heal most matchups, and some bosses where they don't need to heal too much, they could just turn into shadow priest, put vampiric embrace for this little heal that it gives. It gives a lot of threat though, so be careful, and try to heal through your damage until you get or if you have the consumes, you could like again have the fights that are going to be enough, and you're going to deal more damage than what you would do as a disc priest. So that's also an option. And since that dual spec is a thing, I do believe like priests are wanted because they are very good healers. In dungeons, they are probably the best one with Paladin, except shamans where they are seen as a Wind Fury bot. Priests are really good at healing. You can literally stop damage directly with a shield. You don't need to benedict, like don't need to do a bop like a paladin to stop damage, because again, a bop removes all the threat from the enemies, and that could maybe turn someone into a meat grinder and like destroy them. While priest, they can just like shield and give you a bit of time to do a flash heal or a greater heal, and it could like be enough to make the group survive. I really love a priest in that aspect. In raids, you want them more in alliance than in horde, and in PvP, you want to run priest. Again, it's too strong to not run with it. Literally like a shield. If you're facing a warrior, you're shielding the enemy, the ally, and boom, the warrior gets no rage, and at that point it is really a headless chicken. So I do believe priests are doing pretty well in that aspect as well. And then I'm going to now change a few things. I think since I did make a very top heavy tier list, I'm going to drop Druids into C tier with pain in my heart, because I do believe like I need to make space for Hunter, which is the B tier spot for PvP, PvE, raids, and dungeons. Why did I drop Druid? Because I do feel like once I have compared everything, I could say, look, there is no C tier, but realistically, I think there could be a spot for C tier for Druid. And that's with like again with the mind of I really love Druids. I played Druid in 2019. I know the pain points of Druids, and I know how it is in Classic. Like it is a jack of all trade. You can do anything, you can do everything, but worse than any other class. So that's the problem. And in TBC, it gets better for tanking, it gets better for healing, it even gets better for feral druids, to be fair. So in general, I do believe like Druid C tier is probably the better spot right now. And for hunters being B tier, it is truly the utility is there, right? In dungeons or like UBRS or whatever, like bigger dungeons, traps are very useful. Being able to pull is very useful as well. You have one of the most best damage, like basic out of the blue. You don't need gear to do damage as a hunter, while you clearly need gear as a warrior. You want to run maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 hunters max in a raid. Maybe at the start you could run 5 even, because they level very fast. You might have 5 hunters in your raid, in your guild. They have spec, which is giving the warriors some attack power, which is going to help them pump even more. So obviously they are very good at that. And you could technically, and again, it's like a hypothesis, you could run a shaman hunter the triple warrior group, and that would like make the warriors really pump a lot. But now, is it better to run a 3 warrior group, or you could just run a 4 warrior group? That's the issue. PvP wise, it is not really sought out after, but if you have a hunter, it's always going to be welcome because defending is really good as a hunter. Freezing trap, frost trap, you can slow them, you can actually destroy people with your aim shot. I think your pet is a huge nuisance towards classes as well. So I do believe Hunter has a spot in PvP, but it is not like you need to have one. The same as a rogue, pretty much. Uh, in raids, you are going to run hunters. It's going to be one of the best geared player of the raid as well. But I do believe, like, if you think about purely what are the best classes to group up with, I do believe Hunter is not really cited in those tops, which is not that bad, but also I think it's over exaggerated. In dungeons, Hunters are really, really good because their damage is very high, they have a pet, and in general they're doing pretty well as well. So I do love hunters in dungeons. I do enjoy PvP hunters, although it's not really something I'm going to look up for in my pre-mates, but some pre-mates want to run with a hunter. And the same for raids, you have 3 max hunters and they're going to do very well, but it's not like it's a bit egoistical compared to the other classes above the hunter. So this is a tier list. I'm going to cut this one, delete row, and we are good. Um, obviously, I do believe like that it is a subjective list. Some people may say, no, are you crazy? How is Paladin S tier, or how is Shaman S tier and not Mage? That's okay, that's your opinion, but my opinion is based around PvP, PvE, everything out of Classic, and I do believe like that list is representative of the terrain. If you're a Holy Paladin, you're going to find a guild pretty easily. If you are a Shaman, you're going to find a guild pretty easily in Classic, and in TBC it's even worse. Probably going to be the Soul S tier of TBC. And if you're a warrior, you're always going to find a spot, although the issue will be the competition on gear, but that you already know. Again, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.